touch, whom you touch. Let go, let it go. Slow, boom, boom. Earth, heaven, and hell. Earth, heaven, and hell. Die when you die. Die when you die. Die when you die. Die when you die. Lie down, you lie down. Lie down, you lie down. And you die when you die.
Try to be in the light. Alan, try to be in the light. We're still on camera, baby. It's a final communication from Alan through the medium of a very dear friend of mine, maybe the last words he spoke or thought. Kaddish from a Dharma bum. Something to look forward to, no matter whatever it is in. This circle of life and death, whoever for, wherever to. I'm on the road again. Something to look forward to. I'm on the road again. I'm on the road again. From Alan.
Here we go.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I've got to...
Let me introduce you. Eddie Woods is an American who lives in Amsterdam for a long, long time. And you're part of the alternative poetry scene. You're active in organizing poetry for a long time. You started Ins and Outs, which was in the 70s, the leading English language poetry magazine.
Late 70s, early 80s.
Now you're involved in doing things at cafes like Co Meyer every second Tuesday.
Every second Tuesday of the month is Co Meyer.
It's Co Meyer, which is a poetry reading evening.
Performance, poetry reading, music. Something that started kind of spontaneously back in November of '95, and has been getting stronger and stronger, and a lot of attention in that little funky corner of the Jordan.
Now we showed your performance yesterday, where there was a special day remembering Allen Ginsberg, who died. You've known him.
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Well, at first, I mean, a number of the people who you've been talking to probably met Alan in other circumstances. I met him first through correspondence. It was when I was doing Ins and Outs magazine, and the first 3 issues were done in 1978. And I was put in touch with him by Ira Cohen. And I read last night the Mirror poem for Allen Ginsberg by Ira Cohen.
It seems all these people that we now see as the Beat Generation, but also the people in Holland like Simon Vinkenoog and you, it seemed to have been a very small world.
Well, it was its own kind of circle, and it connected here, and it also had to do with people who knew each other from travels. And again through correspondences. I met Ira Cohen first in the mid-'70s in Kathmandu. He knew a number of other... But
that's funny. I mean, we're in Amsterdam, they came from America, and you meet the people in Kathmandu.
Right, but people were traveling, and they were going to some of the same places, maybe not at the same time. We're giving each other's name. We're encountering others who knew this one or that somewhere on the road, because there were different kind of roads. There was Kerouac's Road, which was racing back and forth, across the United States.
He wrote the book On the Road.
Yeah, but I mean, that's sort of on the road. Kerouac didn't go very far afield after that. I mean, he did go to Tangier, he did go to Mexico, he spent some time in Europe, primarily in France, but apart from that, it was mostly an American scene. People like Alan moved out of it, and they also moved beyond the Beat Generation thing. Alan
because
grew.
he became part of the 60s anti-war movement, homosexual coming out.
Right. Well, of course, the homosexual thing was from, the very beginning, speaking out about it. That was already in Howl, which was in, the 50s. And there was...
And that was a poem that got him fame, and a public reading of him got him into trouble with the law?
Well, there was an obscenity trial. City Lights Books was put on trial. Ferlinghetti is the publisher. And it went, I believe, to the Supreme Court, and it was found to have some redeeming value, and therefore, you know, Customs had to release it. That's how it was first went to court. It was seized. Right? I mean, there were many of these books. Henry Miller's books were being confiscated, and there were trials about that. And even D.H. Lawrence, when they first tried to publish Lady Chatterley's Lover, and even when the film came out, and this goes on and on and on.
But the First Amendment goes so high, all the time has writers.
It's interesting if you think about the fact that the second president of the United States, who was also the first vice president, John Adams, had to come to Amsterdam in order to publish things that back then, we're talking about the time of the Revolutionary War, the war for, you know, liberation from as a colony of Britain, had to come to Amsterdam in order to publish things he couldn't publish in America then. Right? And John Adams lived in the Outerzides, right on the corner of the Outerzides, Achterbergwal, and the Damstraat extension, Outer Hoogstraat. He had a room. And I think he was having an affair with, this is nothing to do with Ginsberg, but an affair with his landlady. But he had to come to Amsterdam, and because Holland has long had, particularly Amsterdam, this tradition of press freedom. One of the very few people ever to be get in any trouble with the law for publishing anything here is me. For that same issue of Ins and Outs magazine, in which Plutonium Ode appeared, its first publication in the world.
That was the first time that
poem
this
appeared.
cry against the pollution, because plutonium, there was a train they stopped or something.
That's right, right. They were doing one of those
Protesting.
things. Yes, right, sitting on the railroad tracks to stop the train and so forth. And Allen had, this was what he considered his most significant poem after the other two major ones.
Which was Kaddish?
Kaddish was the one that many people feel is his very best. Of course, he won the National Book Award for The Fall of America, which is a series of poems. Right? This may be a little bit rough around the edges because I only knocked it off after dinner. And I hope I can read it. Let's call it Kaddish Bolognese. Even my Jewish friends think I'm Jewish, but yeah. For Allen Ginsberg. Am I in the lights? So, Allen, you finally hail-bopped out of here, sailed off into the timeless mind frame you've been chanting and writing towards all your adult-born days this last lifetime around. And you did it, I know, without benefit of comment. As you said to me once, downstairs before leaving my lost empire building, "Hey, Eddie, you know as well as I do, there's no such thing as cause and effect." Then you kissed me on the lips and shook hands with my girlfriend. And Peter Orlowski, who upstairs in the office sat on the floor weaving baskets while you and I ranted our eruditions at each other, with So-So Ben Passett looking bemusedly on, Peter padded out the door onto snow and ice, barefoot, saying, "Goodbye, Woods," in that stiff upper back, clean asshole, and smiling vegetable voice of his. That was a nice meeting, Allen, as were the ones and the before and the ones after. The times we shared nasi goreng's boozelessly at Boyo's, the poster signing at the Cannon Gallery, you with a bad heart, and Ben and I wrangling over the rights to your signature, much to your compassionate dismay, I am sure. Or better yet, that reading at the Cosmos, the one you never knew, perhaps thank God, the whole truth about. You, Peter, Stephen Taylor, and Mr. Gregory Corso, reincarnation of Catullus, his boozed up, smacked out, totally disarrayed self in lovable person. And you told Gregory either he straightened up PDQ or shipped out. 'cause no way would you read with him the lyrical beat brat of a bard. No damn way if he stayed in that condition. And Gregory straightened up all right. Only on the very night he called out to me across the still empty room, called out with sweet pleading cold turkey poise, Eddie, oh Eddie, oh Eddie, oh Eddie. And yes, Allen, I did indeed slip him the ball of opium that pulled him and maybe all of you through that beautiful reading, you howling Gregory winking through the marriage poem. Oh, sorry, my dearest love. I know this sounds like name dropping, and probably it is. Sail on, dearest Allen, on through the glorious bardos, on to the beauty of total universes and endless light, of smiling infinities and bliss beyond dreaming. I don't know if you are really a great poet, but you certainly were a sincere one, gifted with the grace and intellect always to pierce through to the true heart of most meaningful mind mantras. In short, a great soul all true lovers will always be connected to.
Some people say it's the old hippies, really, that are still in not only, strangely enough, poetry, but also in things like cyberspace. It's the old hippies that still set the tone, so to speak. Because Leary and people like Ginsberg, they were there for 40 years, 50, 60.
Well, we're talking about from, that particular thing, the mid-50s. Of course, they were, there are always these labels for these groups, and some people fit into it and some don't. Before that, you had the Bohemians, which is something that you can attach to many different
traditions and
eras of writers. But there was this one in the States, particularly in the East Coast, right? In sort of after the war, and then leading into this beat generation.
But it was a tribal thing in the sense that the people that we both know that came to Amsterdam over the years, they were all in this tribal group.
Tribal group, that was
something. And there
something.
were a few Amsterdam people like Ben Posset.
Well, Ben Posset particularly had this idea of the tribe, right? Yeah. And sort of a worldwide commune, which didn't mean people living, obviously, in the same place, but who were feeling. And so he saw it as sometimes bringing these people together from different parts of the world, from different cultures, and as a kind of tribal gathering. And this was his aim in organizing One World Poetry.
Yes, but which is also to be found in what Ruijgoort does with their
also,
approach,
indeed.
Both traveling out and inviting people here.
Right.
So there is a tradition in Amsterdam of doing that.
There is, but Ben Posset was particularly the person who started this thing with poetry, and Amsterdam as being one of the centers for an annual, and then in between some other poetry gatherings, literary gatherings, and people coming from really afar, from Japan. He had spent time in Japan. He met Gary Snyder in Japan. See, some of these people from this beat generation then moved out, went into other things. Allen was particularly attracted to Eastern religions and mysticism. Gary Snyder gravitated more toward Japan.
More
Allen,
Zen-like.
More in that Zen tradition. Allen, India, Nepal, and
the Buddhist
thing, very, very much so. Mm-hmm. And of course, his guru was Trungpa, and that was in Naropa Institute, and there are all sorts of stories, and there were scandals, and there were the Great Naropa Wars, and there was the trashing of Allen Ginsberg, and there was a Trungpa who maybe was enlightened, at least when he was sober, which was only about 10% of the time, and he always said that he wanted to come back as a Japanese baseball team because then he could drink 9 times as much sake, right? But he got things from Trungpa. Trungpa was the one who pushed him into spontaneous poetry. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, you don't write it, you just, you're in a place and just let it come out. And He did that. Whether it was all really good poetry or it was sincere, as I was saying the other night. That's one thing Allen Ginsberg was. He was sincere. He was compassionate. And he really, well, he was a Buddhist. I mean,
Now, one thing that I'm missing in Amsterdam is we did an interview with J.J. Webb, who is inspirator of internet poetry. And that I missed in Amsterdam. There are some people that write on the net. Why is that? Did we miss out in Amsterdam on the internet poetry thing? Are there no young poets?
I don't know. I can't really talk about the net because I'm kind of old-fashioned. I still use a manual typewriter, you know. And that poem I read last night was even handwritten. Yeah. And it, just fresh. That's why I said I hope I can read it, because I had to read my own after-dinner scribbling. But you're the expert on the net, Luc.
Well, yeah, but that's what I know. What do you think we should? How should we remember Allen Ginsberg?
How should we remember him?
How should we remember him?
Well, I would like to answer that to say if we really want to remember Allen, we would try to live really good, honest lives. That would be remembering Allen. That's what he would like. Right? That's what his poetry was trying to say. I mean, it was very expansive. It was very much of the soul and of things beyond this everyday reality. And I would say if we wanted to remember him, I know you were asking another question, you know, perhaps how should we think about his poetry, or how should we think of him in a historical, literary sense? But I would say to remember him is to get something from his poetry. It would be the same with Walt Whitman, you know, of whom he was probably a reincarnation. As I said, that Corso was a
Walt Whitman was the American poet who first started with William Blake, a kind of mystical poetry line.
Yes, but they wrote in a very similar way. Free verse, you know, the type of poetry. These very long, unmetered, unrhymed lines, and just talking about things universal and things that were springing from the heart and springing from inner visions and had to do with nature as they were seeing it then, and commenting on their society. Whitman was also political. He was also homosexual. And Allen is very much in his tradition, in his style of writing as well. Whitman wrote one continuing book that he kept expanding. Leaves of Grass. It started as a slim volume and got bigger and bigger and bigger, and that is the entirety of Walt Whitman, which is still a great deal. He was the good gray poet. You could also say the good gay poet, right? And
now, I have this idea about the guild of the happy ones, but it doesn't feel like Allen Ginsberg, when I met him, and I was happy. He felt he wasn't happy in his body very much. He wasn't happy in his life situation. Money was not his greatest thing. He didn't feel very happy.
Well, I don't know. You were talking about meeting him, and you described
65,
him as...
he must have 65, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I last saw Allen, it was when we did this silkscreen print, and that was in 1992. He was already in poor health. He was having trouble with his heart. This thing with the liver cancer was apparently very recent. I mean, I mean, new to him. He had just been given the news. Excuse me. But, and as you said, he lived under very difficult financial situations. I mean, he was in a walk-up for many years, although he was very famous. And his books were selling.
He was happy when I bought him dinner. That was
sure. Allen also, I mean, money would come to him and it would go out again because he was a very generous person. I mean, not to mention the people who were constantly ripping things off from him, including his close friends, Gregory Corso, right? But that's what junkies do. And Gregory is one of the beats who didn't change much. I mean, wonderful poet, but don't let him stay in your house. Allen, you could always let stay in your house, you know.
In how far was he? Yeah. In how far was he Jewish? Now you're not Jewish, or you look Jewish, but you're not. You're Italian.
Lenny Bruce said, if you're Italian, you're Jewish. If you're from New York, you're Jewish. I'm both. So you know, I'm a New York Dago who grew up thinking he was a Jew. Allen was very Jewish. I mean, and very New York from that Ashkenazic, you know, European Jewish tradition.
And yet a link to.
I don't know that he always ate kosher. You know. I mean,
Well, with me he did. Yeah,
he did.
Yeah.
Huh?
Well, he
Kosher
ate
bacon?
very careful because he had.
Well, he had to watch his.
Yes.
I mean, he had health things. But what do you mean by that? How Jewish was he? You know. I mean,
Because.
he was circumcised, I'm sure. I don't know. I never looked, but.
No, but the funny thing is that we have the West Coast and the East Coast, and under the surface, the West Coast is also very Jewish. The silly wood industry, as we call it now, is very Jewish. Yet he was a link between the two worlds. His books were published in California, in Berkeley.
San Francisco,
he had his
yeah, right.
heydays in Berkeley, and yet he lived in New York.
He was an East Coast person. I mean, he was born, as we know, in Newark, New Jersey, and he grew up in Paterson. And that's the connection with the poet William Carlos Williams, who was also a doctor. He was from Paterson, New Jersey. And Allen was a New Yorker. Right? But I mean, naturally, there was this connection, I mean, with what was happening in the West Coast, particularly in San Francisco. That's not LA, right? And San Francisco has more of a link with New York than it does with any of the other places in California itself, just like it has a link with Amsterdam, right? And as being kind of port cities. And
how do you think Allen thought about Amsterdam?
Oh, he liked it very much. I mean, he enjoyed coming here. And he, again, I stress, it was Ben Passett who got him over here in the beginning. I published Plutonium Ode at the same time that Ben was putting together the first poetry festival here. There had been a smaller one the year before in Venice, P77, but the beginning of it all was P78. And then it went on for several years and just grew and grew and grew. Allen didn't come to that one, but he came subsequently. But at the time of that first festival, Ins and Outs magazine published its third issue with Plutonium Ode, and Ben was already bringing over a number of other people, including William Burroughs and Patti Smith, who this is another generation, but had a very close connection with these people. Burroughs is another person. I mean, he was he's connected with the Beats, but he's his own individual. And he was a kind of mentor to these people, and that had to do with Columbia University.
How does it come that all these people were into drugs? I mean, I met Patti Smith a few years ago in Berlin. We did an interview with her, and she was trying to score, obviously. I mean, what was his fascination with drugs?
Well, I mean, the drug thing was, of course, it was of that time to begin with. This was the whole acid explosion. I mean, people turning on with all sorts of things, great part thanks to your friend Timothy Leary, and I was never quite certain. I mean, I always felt actually that it shouldn't have been promoted in that way. I always saw drugs as more of a sacramental thing that shouldn't have been so popularized, and that was just falling into the hands of playing into the hands of the CIA, et cetera, and so on.
Was it necessary for the poetry?
Well, I think for a lot of people had to do that. They had to, we all did. I mean, had to experiment with find out what was going to happen and whether we were getting something from it. Now, some people just did it like that, got a certain benefit, and then moved on and realized, I mean, if you stayed with the drugs and you could only get the experiences or the visions or the creativity with drugs, then something was wrong. It was meant to be sort of another key that unlocked certain things, and then you continued without the benefit of these substances. Mm-hmm. Other people, of course, then tried other things and got hooked in the wrong way. I mean, and many of us have had this experience. Burroughs, we know his thing with heroin, but then he transformed it.
Yeah, but it also seems Burroughs and the Yage letters,
right.
Going to ayahuasca, which comes up now.
And yet he was one of the first. He was going down there into the jungles of Peru, and he was writing these letters to Allen, and
but that's a
way ahead
striking
of his
similarity
time.
Between the 60s and the 90s there.
It's a striking similarity. It's also a similarity going back to earlier periods. Mm-hmm. Germany, during the Weimar Republic, right, the time of the Wandervögel, right? That was also a very free time, and but then, yeah, it fell apart. It fell apart. It was transformed. Some people see it. There was a conspiracy that, and we know that half of those people, you know, either exterminated or went into exile or fled in some certain way, and the others just changed their politics and became Nazis. I mean, it was...
Yeah, but it's funny. But what remains is that we had Burroughs and Ginsberg and Kerouac and all those guys, and we're now in the 90s. Leary died. The other guy you mentioned?
Herbert Huncke, who passed on last year, right.
He was the Mephisto in many of these...
Mephisto and Howl, he was the gray figure through... he appears in many of the books under different names, because Kerouac was writing about all of these people and giving them different names. He wanted to write actually one continuing book. His publishers wouldn't go for it. He had to change it. But he was the one, as I was telling you before, who first sold a gun to William Burroughs, first sold smack to William Burroughs, and actually even had a certain way of talking and presenting himself that Burroughs picked up on. And so that Burroughs' demeanor that we know so well now came in great part from Herbert Huncke. And if you'd ever heard Herbert do a reading or just sit and talk, you would see the tremendous similarity. You see that this was like another aspect of Burroughs. And he was a kind of an underworld mentor to William Burroughs for that darker side, right? And he was always there on the scene. And finally, he started to come out with his own writings after having done a lot of time in prison and numerous thieveries, including from his friends. I mean, one time he stole Allen's stereo equipment. And Allen was going around telling everybody, oh, Jesus, Herbert ripped me off. He's got all my things. And one day Herbert went up to him and he said, Allen, you should stop talking about that. He said, why? He said, well, people think you're crazy because they see that you and I are still talking, and yet you tell them that I stole all these things for you. They're going to think you're a little bit touched, Allen. Just be cool, right? And yeah.
How did the tradition from the Beat generation go on? I mean, in America now you talk about Bukowski.
Bukowski he was from another scene. Again, they linked up. Bukowski was more of an individual, more of a loner. He didn't do many readings. There were different people who tried to get him over here. I even saw one of his letters of response, and he said, "I don't do readings anymore." He said, "All those other people do. Fuck them, let them do it."
Because
but
that's
he was more L.A. You see, although he was published originally as well by City Lights in San Francisco, and then eventually by Black Sparrow, and was picked up by a lot of universities, university presses and so on, when he was with his poetry. He, as far as I know, only did one major tour out of the United States, and that's when he went back to his native Germany. He was born in Andernach, right, and taken to the States when he was quite young and everything, and he did a tour, and there was a book that came out called Shakespeare Never Did This. That was Charles Bukowski, and of course there was a film about him with Mickey O'Rourke, Barfly, which, I mean, shows an aspect of Bukowski. He has been quite thoroughly translated. He became best known first in Germany through the German translations of his work. Then they started to pick up on it in America.
But this is also because the Beat generation and I mean, we can say you and also in Simon, you were performing poets mostly. You would give force and power to the performance.
Yeah.
If you would then read the poetry, you would say, but there was this rhythm in saying it and a forceful power. That
I mean, certainly with a lot of Allen's work, I mean, he was a particularly good performer. I, for a long period of time, never cared to do too many readings because I was always a bit afraid. I mean, I've always wanted my work to stand up on paper. I always write to get something out of it myself in order to discover something that I don't know. For me, the experience of writing is you should come out somewhere else than where you started, right? And that's happening sitting at the typewriter, or I haven't gotten to using a computer yet, sometimes by hand. But I never wanted to do too many performances because although I know I am an okay performer, I could see it happening if you do too many. You start then to consider the audience appeal too much. Either you do the same things over and over again that you know work, or you start to write for that performance value. And sometimes I feel that can detract.
But isn't that what Allen Ginsberg did? I mean, I remember seeing him there, and he was with a band. In the later stage of his life, he worked with the bands. and it was singing really. It was
Well, with his little toy harmonium, right? And he would do things of Blake's. He really liked to do Blake. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the light. I mean, and he teamed up then also with the guitarist Stephen Taylor. And of course, he had this musical connection. He was on the Rolling Thunder tour with Bob Dylan, and they were very good friends. And he was close to Jerry Garcia of the Dead, and so he was always around.
These were all tribe people, yeah?
Of course, they were connected. I mean, the Dead were giving all these free concerts, right, to support different kind of movements. They were making money, doing some paying gigs, but they were always there.
Supporting it, having
supporting
acts.
whatever, right?
Yeah, Baba Olatunji,
Exactly.
all this, the world music thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is something that Allen could very well relate to, you know, because he was.
To wrap it up, historically, Allen Ginsberg.
Historically, Allen Ginsberg is in the great American tradition of poetry that, as I say, a connection with Whitman, and if you respect Whitman's work in his time, and it's still there. I mean, it's eternal, and the best of Allen's also. God bless Allen Ginsberg.
Thank you.
Okay.
Eddie.
Thank you, Luke. I had back some years ago the great privilege and honor to have first published in the world one of Allen's long poems, which has since been translated in many languages here by Simon Winkenow, come out in book form and so on, Plutonium Ode. And that was published in Ins and Outs magazine in 1978. Remember, Allen? In that same issue, Allen was a great dispenser, self-promoter. He got things out. So in this issue, he was also giving out a poem that was written about him, to him, by his kind of alter ego, a gentleman named Ira Cohen. And what I would like to read now for you is not Plutonium Ode, the original version, but rather, are you listening, Ira? I know Allen is. Ira Cohen's mirror poem for Allen Ginsberg after reading The Fall of America. Why did you vomit up cold oatmeal on the living room carpet? Was that a lesson in truth sincerity or a yogic exercise? I mean, I'm really glad you took off all your clothes so many times you started a fad or epidemic. But how many naked people can eat 2 ice cream cones at once and still talk poetry of mad mind growth like you? Did you really think I was a spy from uncircumcised tribes of virus control out to steal all homosexual power and secret bank books of Baron Charles at Manufacturers Trust on Avenue B? Did I ever see your stoned red eye unblinking at Columbia Library glory hole, or put your beard on by mistake in the morning? There was some mix-up of dream landscape running all the way from Marrakesh in flames to the burning Ghats of Benares. How come I didn't see you in the Golden Temple by full moon when bombs fell on Amritsar? Or were you disguised as old Sikh in beautiful robes and turban, turning giant pages of Guru Nanak behind glass while blind singers shivered in the moonlight? Or was it you who sent the mad Muslim to my red plastic table in the Soho Chico to show me the marks of murder on upturned palms full of X's? Did something die on February 3rd, my birthday? That day that Griffius Ginsberg, that figment of Borges's imagination in the sacred tetragrammaton, was not murdered. Only a fake Pierrot playing dead as he was carried away, feet dragging behind him into a mysterious automobile. Was it South America? Or was something born on that day? Who would you be, Cain or Abel? Or is it possible to be both with a roast beef sandwich in one hand and a boiled vegetable in the other? You are a master of double take and deserve to hear angels singing in the eternal delicatessen where the prototype of your own monolithic majesty comes to spank you like a loving father bearing salamis to Jerusalem. See the great thrones rocking in the golden light of madness unafraid, and there the columns of light like endless stacks of transparent coins shimmering over the Dead Sea. We take out the Akashic furniture burned by the followers of Sabbatai V on the day before the day which never came, and sit down to discuss matters of mistaken identity, like angels playing the dozens. If I could play billiards, I might transcend the subtlest obliquities of the Chinese mind and write secret books under your name, open charge accounts in candy stores, and travel free on airplanes. But instead, I sit here in Kathmandu, ponder the significance of Singha Durbar in flames, the still readable black ashes of 1 billion records floating over the city, Shiva's justice rendered 1 week before the revoking of all hashish licenses in Nepal, July 16, 1973. Are the black ashes of our civilization's history falling on your head wherever you are? Wearing capes of burned paper, let them be poems. We will meet on the George Washington Bridge, where we will settle these questions and decide why you were chosen to impersonate us all.